I'd like to take a moment and thank today's video sponsor, Antronics, a Penn, Ohio social media partner. Quality HFC mainline and drop devices at competitive prices. Check them out at www.antronics.com.
Okay, so something else I want to point out while we're looking at this particular cable. This is the end of my cable, as I pointed out, at 335 feet, all right? It's a disconnected cable. There's nothing after that. So let me ask you a question, all my students. If that's the end of my cable, why can I still see things after the end of my cable?
Ooh. Is that a second and third order harmonic?
Exactly. Sometimes we call them ghost reflections, harmonics. You're exactly right. So, more specifically, these are reflections of the end of this cable right here. Sometimes they're called echoes because they echo. The reason why we suspect they are ghost reflections is because, Mike, give me some reasons why we know that we think they are.
The distance should be exactly twice the length of your primary fault.
It has no choice but to be exactly, okay? We don't have to measure this to see that these are exactly the same distance. They tend to do that. They also tend to reverse polarity. So if I were standing on this end and Mike were over on the other end shorting this out, not only would that flip from open to short, but all of the other reflections would also change polarity, proving that. There's a couple reasons why I say that. I'm always going to go out there in the field before I'm testing. I'm going to ask people, let's look at the map first and see what's supposed to be there. And let's see what we tried first. People love to tell me, yeah, but the map is never right. I'm going to say never right, never right. Because in all honesty, if the end of this cable is somewhere about 335 feet, I'm not going to argue if it's 337. What do I care? But who's the dum-dum who's looking for something after the end of the cable that's disconnected? These are ghost reflections, okay? So here's the deal. Ghost reflections tend to happen the most on shorter distances. They tend to happen the most on your higher frequency, smaller pulse widths. They tend to happen after the end of the cable. But here's a question for you. Do ghost reflections ever happen inside your cable length?
Yes.
Yes, they do. And do they suck?
They do suck.
They do. And let me tell you why. This is where it gets really interesting, everybody. I don't have a stored waveform right now that shows me some ghost reflections that I found, but I'm going to simulate one for you and show you what this looks like. This is my cable under test. We've already established that. I've also already told you what it is. Everything after that is a ghost reflection. So I want you to put on your pretend hats for a second. I'm going to do an overshift on this waveform, and I'm going to pretend like this is my cable under test, okay? If this is my cable under test, there's a couple things I want you to notice. I'm going to pretend like this is the output pulse and this is the end of my cable. Don't worry about what that signature is. We already know that this is the problem right here. So a few things. When you see ghost reflections that happen inside your cable, if you suspect that this could be a ghost reflection, I just gave you a bunch of salesman type responses of could be this, typically this. In most cases, in many cases, I said that on purpose because it doesn't always work that way. It's patterns that I need you to start to notice. The problem is, first of all, in this particular case, this is not exactly twice the distance of what, right? So that's not going to be a red flag for you. However, this does happen to be the same distance from here to here. Not that you would notice that, but when I use the term ghost reflection, what is it that you notice about this shape versus this shape?
Well, they're inverted, and just looking at the distance relationship from left to right, that event is approximately the same distance to the previous pulse as the inverted version of it is from the return pulse. So they're actually mirror images of each other.
Exactly, and a literally mirror image like this. So here's the deal. When you do start to see, first things first, when you do start to see reflections inside your cable that look exactly the same as another, you do need to suspect that. If you see that it's a mirror reflection, you also need to suspect that. But let's say this were my cable under test. What is the simplest way to determine that this could be a reflection? What's the simplest way?
Well, so the cable's shorted, right? And at the
Uh,
end.
yeah, pretend that you don't know what that is. Pretend it's
Okay.
open.
If I were to go interact with the other end of the cable and change that response, the reflection should also change.
Or if you just went over to this side and shot back this way
Or that.
and this disappears, that was your proof that this was a ghost reflection, which also answers another question. Sometimes you can shoot a cable from one side to the other and it looks completely different. That is why. Now, I am always going to tell you, and your cable system is always going to tell you, if you got to turn this in for repair, you have to shoot this from both sides. Yeah, I'm going to tell you that as well. But between you and I, we always know we can't always get to the other side. Right now, it's late at night. I can't get there, and this man won't let me in his backyard because he's not even a cable subscriber. He won't even let me back there. So you can't always get there. So by all means, get as much information as you can, but shooting from the other side would make this go away, right? Now, here's another deal. Trick question. This works better in a classroom setting, but I'm going to ask this question and answer it myself. How long of a jumper cable do you need? The reason that's a trick question is because I kind of tricked you into thinking that all you need is a 6 or a 10-foot jumper, because most of us TDR manufacturers, that's what we supply you with. But we don't exactly supply you with that because it's necessarily the best option. We supply you with that because it's the simplest option. If you were in the habit, we are trying to get you in the habit of carrying around less equipment, not more. That's why our TDRs and most of our test equipment is getting smaller and smaller. But what if I told you that there is a way to all but eliminate ghost reflections that happen inside your cable? Here's the deal.
I would say, tell me more.
I'm going to tell you more, but wait, there is more. We supply you with a shorter jumper because it's simplest. But if you use a longer jumper, and if all of a sudden it made this second reflection go away and you had to shoot it less, you might be interested in using a longer jumper. Now, how long of a jumper am I talking about? You might not like the answer. So Mike, go ahead and give me a guess.
500 feet.
Okay, you might like the answer. I'm gonna say if you start to use a jumper that is somewhere between 50 and 75 feet, and all of a sudden, if it quiets down your line under test, if I used a 75-foot jumper right here and this still was as prominent, but this completely disappeared, that would also let me know this was a ghost reflection. Now, when customers scoff at me and say 75-foot jumper, this is what I'm suggesting. You don't have to use it all the time, but make yourself one and take it with you. And if you notice that all of a sudden it quiets down your test, yeah, it's going to put you 50 or 75 feet further away, okay? But it's all relative. If it quiets down your line under test, just carry it with you. And then if you see something that looks like all of these things are starting to look suspicious, mirror reflections, double the distance, and if all of a sudden that quiets down your testing, you will use that longer jumper more. I have several systems throughout the country that make it mandatory for their technicians to use a 75-foot jumper at all times. That's why they do it.
Okay, so I'll ask the dumb question. Why would that ghost reflection be not as prominent with the 75-foot jumper as it is with the 6-foot jumper?
I wish I knew the technical reasons why. I do not.
Okay, we can edit that part out.
I don't mind.
Or we can use it in the blooper reel. One of the two.
That's fine. That's fine. No, but I've never known why that is.
That's interesting, though.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Now, one more thing. Oh, I have this particular waveform. And Mike, I apologize, this part gets a little bit long, but this is where we get a lot of the good discussions that happen in class, by the way. Okay, one of the things at the very beginning that I asked, that I said when we talked about the distance of the pulse widths, how long they shoot, how do you know how long a signal will go? If I told you that a 2 nanosecond pulse width sometimes goes a couple hundred feet and sometimes it goes several thousand, how do you know? Well, I'm going to tell you how. This is not science, but I'm going to call it Chuck science. And since I have the microphone, my mic, my rules. This is what I'm going to do. Whenever I set my output pulse up, my waveform on my TDR screen, I don't care whether you're looking at a live waveform, a recalled waveform, or an uploaded waveform on your smart device. I want your output pulse as far left and your end of your cable as far right, so you have maximum zoomage. I just made up that word, zoomage. And then I'm going to increase my vertical gain to where my output pulse is as high as my display screen is. So in this case, if I want to know, did my 2 nanosecond pulse width go 336 feet? The answer is yes, because I can see the end of my cable. That's how I know it went there, okay? And in most cases, it will be that prominent. But let's use a different number. Let's say I want to know if my 2 nanosecond pulse width went 1,000 feet, and this is 1,000 feet right here. This compared to here, I can still see the end of my cable, and that is still rather prominent. So my 2 nanosecond pulse width did get 2,000 feet with gusto, right? Excuse me, 1,000 feet. But let's pretend it's like this. Let's say at 1,000 feet, I can still see the end of my cable, but it's starting to wane. I'm losing signal. I'm losing signal. That's how I know my 2 nanosecond pulse width did not go as far. Okay, that's when I start to ask questions. Why didn't I get more signal towards the end here? Maybe this first event over here could be the water problem. Mike had mentioned the way the high end starts to roll up. This is how you start to put your other ideas together and dig less holes, oh, by the way. And also picture this. Let's go back to this reflection that we're looking at. As I said, I can see the end of my cable prominently, but if this were a situation where I could barely see the end of my cable, take these 2 dings in the hardline cable right here. What if these 2 dings in the hardline cable were not right here, but they were over towards the end of the cable? If I can barely see a solid open, the most catastrophic fault you can find, if I can barely see that at the end of my cable, do you think I'm going to be able to see 2 dings in the hardline cable over here? No. And I'll have no idea. That's the point. So many times a customer, a technician will think, as long as this line is flat, I've already found the problem here, or I can't see anything. There's nothing to see here. But if you can't see the end of the cable, which isn't open, I promise you can't see anything else. That's also going to be a red flag for you, that you're going to need more signal. There's a couple ways around this. You could try and increase your vertical gain, and it's entirely possible that you might be able to see more stuff over here, or you might be able to increase your pulse width, and you might be able to get something to pop up over here. But the fact does still remain, there is something that's sucking up your signal and is not allowing it to go farther. Go ahead, Mike, you're going to ask a question.
So this is, I think, where the frequency and pulse width relationship comes in, right? Because we're still communicating through a piece of metallic cable, in most cases, or our cases, coaxial cable. And we know that there's more attenuation at higher frequency than there is at lower frequencies.
Yes.
And so if I imagine energy traversing this cable, first of all, there's a fault that we know somewhere around 82 feet. The likelihood that that's causing attenuation to my signal before it gets into the farther end of my cables. And then, oh, by the way, we're measuring the reflection that's coming back, which is also attenuating as it traverses over the cable and has to get back through the initial event to get to the receiver. on that round trip, that attenuation or loss of both the event and the cable is effectively measured twice. Am I thinking about that the right way?
I believe so, yes.
So the greater the event and the impact at that frequency, the less signal is going to get to the end of the cable and back to the receiver.
Yes.